Hey, so I'm back. A lot of stuff's been happening that's prevented me from doing live readings, but today I have a block of time and I have another block of time tomorrow. So we're currently sitting at chapter 25 of 30, as well as an epilogue, which is very short. Um, and so today I'm going to get 25 and 26 done for sure. That's guarantee. And then if I still have time at the end, I will also try to get through 27. The 27 is one of the longer chapters in the book, if not the longest one. But then if I don't, that'll be 27 and 28 for tomorrow, possibly 29 because 28 is a shorter one. And then that'll mean only 30 is left for the end of the story, and the book will be done. So at some point by the end of the weekend, we'll probably be only one or two more live readings away from actually having this finished. Obviously, there was a big delay. My wife and I had our first kid on September 13th after 45 and a half hours of labor. That was an exhausting experience for me. You can imagine how much more so it was for her. And so we've been figuring out the whole parenting thing, and also school has started. So I'm teaching and coaching and doing all those things again. So I just haven't had a lot of time to stream. I certainly haven't been streaming any games or playing anything, unfortunately, which is too bad. But I'm back today, and I'm going to try to recap where we're at here because it's been so long. If you're following on YouTube or Twitch, all the various plot lines are still sort of a few have crossed over, but a lot of them are still separated. So the battle at Delmore, which Trem initially runs away from in fear of failing again, leads to a massive near defeat and almost the death of Joven, except that Trem comes back, and with him in tow comes Ghost to save both Trem and Joven. And now that group is headed toward the caverns. The passage of Chronocarl that Gend has guaranteed them he can show them the way through. The problem, though, is that they are all very suspicious, and Trem has a dream that tells him and warns him that this is exactly what Theseus fears is going to happen. And that's that the shades that attacked them, the Night Cloaks from the inn in Gylakill, are after them now that night has fallen. So they have to deal with that. In the meantime, Angladeus successfully, Varasho was able to rescue his father from the dungeons, though it took bargaining with some rather strange and fearsome creatures in the Cavern of Ancients to do so. And they are now plotting how they can possibly take the kingdom back from Vendile, who has usurped the throne. And Edge and Romand and Raymir are all still attempting to make their way to Mount Iceblade in hopes of being able to, from that vantage point, find some sign of this twisted spire, a location that is believed to be housing some form of forge or design to create a weapon that is going to serve Wolfbane in some way. So that's kind of where we're at. Oh, and they are currently, Raymir, Romand, and Edge, being pursued by Saltillion, who has clearly begun a descent into very deep madness at this point. But we start chapter 5 with Valissa Ulfrin leading the broken army, observing the aftermath of the massive, much more costly battle than they expected attack on Delmore. So Valissa Ulfrin stood atop the hill overlooking Delmore with cold eyes, her expressionless gaze taking in the scene below. Some distance from her, Hrothgar Conan stood as well. He was afraid to come closer as he knew Valissa's stony, unmoving form hid her wrath, which was terrible. The attack had been a miserable failure. They had lost Gornath's ballista, more than a score of gnolls, and the casualties among the broken regulars continued to mount, now reaching over 300 men dead, and as many again wounded. By the end of the day, Valissa expected to hear that even more were dead, from slow killing injuries or infection. No matter how many survived, the fight for such a meager victory had cost a significant number of her forces, even if she had another 10,000 at her disposal. The loss of so many gnolls particularly irked her. She had intended to recruit more as she went south and east, hoping to reach numbers of over 20,000 men and 500 gnolls. After their setback here, she'd be lucky to convince the ones they had to stay. Gornath was still down in the village somewhere, no doubt plundering the entire thing himself. She had seen the great gnoll chieftain, Gren, coming back from the main gate, his body pierced by several heavy arrows. She had demanded to know what had happened, having seen the explosion to the west, but the gnoll snarled at her and moved on without comment. Normally Valissa would have been infuriated by such insubordination, but the beast was clearly not going to stop for anyone, and she did not need to infuriate him further. A great cloud of smoke, black and hot, was rolling up and out of Delmore as the town burned. Valissa continued to watch with her arms crossed, waiting for Gornath to drag himself out of the chaos, as her rage burned as hot as the flames. In normal circumstances, she would have tried seduction on the hot-blooded broken leader, But now her anger was so great she was seriously considering gutting him before he got a word in. Valissa had made her way through life on her sharp mind, skill with a sword, and incredible beauty. This had required a unique mix of discipline and temptation to gather every scrap of recognition and authority she rightly deserved. Never before had she had the opportunity to command such a mighty army as this one, and she was determined not to fail now. However, she had also never envisioned reigning over such a violent and honorless group of marauders. She had watched the public execution of Gornath's rivals at Delmore's northern gate, and understood what he was doing. But in his selfish, cutthroat desire to consolidate his power, she believed he had sacrificed planning and reason in his approach to taking the town. Thus, many had been killed by the unexpected defenders within, who had been given time to organize a real defense and cost many more lives in Valissa's great army. This was why she wanted to kill Gornath, because his petty motivations as a broken chieftain were subverting the greater goals of this campaign. As Valissa stood impatiently waiting for the broken leader, she felt a sudden chill come upon her and spun around with her hand in her sword hilt. Instantly, she recognized the form near her, and her grip on the handle tightened in fear. She tried not to cower before the presence of the Shade, the commander of De'Arvaron's elite unit of Nightcloaks. The hooded form came nearer to her, and she realized it resisted the urge to step back. Slowly, the monstrosity reached up and pulled back its heavy black hood to reveal a white face with black pools for eyes and strange, barely visible scars and symmetrical patterns on the perfectly bleached skin. Valissa could see the emptiness in those eyes, so she tried to focus her own elsewhere. The bald head, also replete with elaborately woven scars, tilted as the thing regarded her briefly. The creature looked skyward, then back at the sword mistress. "We must leave soon. The one my master seeks is fleeing." Valissa shrugged as nonchalantly as she could manage. "Then go. I don't need you here." When it spoke, the thing's mouth opened to reveal a black, endless void, just like the eyes. "Yes, but you must follow us swiftly. Cut off their escape to the west if they evade us." Valissa agreed. "I'll move as soon as I'm able." The Shade stared at her a moment or two longer. Then it replaced its hood, spun, and seemed to disappear and reappear in fits and starts, getting further away from Valissa, until it was simply gone. Seconds later, she felt an icy wind rush by as the Nightcloaks swept silently past her on their dread mounts down into Delmore. Shuddering, she glanced up to try to follow their progress and saw a haggard Gornath stumbling up the hill to her, heavily leaning on a great branch to support himself. Valissa tried to assume her intimidating stance once again and failed. The broken warlord looked horrid. His body was covered in bandages across his left side, and she could see innumerable cuts on his face and hands. Reaching her, he saluted as best he could, which was quite poorly, and then collapsed into a sitting position beside her. "Those damned fiends nearly ran me over." Valissa looked down at him. "They're pursuing the strangers who led the defenders." Gornath adjusted his sitting position and grimaced. "I hope they have better luck than we did." The sword mistress felt her anger rise again, and she kicked the sitting commander. "What happened down there? How incompetent are your men?" Gornath leaped up, much faster than Valissa would have bet he was capable of in his battered condition, and held his curved dagger to her chest. "We got attacked by an orc, a knight, and a mage. Would you like to explain what you sent me into?" Valissa sniffed disdainfully at the dagger and pushed it away. "I told you they would be there." "You never said they were trained combatants," Gornath snarled. "I knew nothing of them. Your scout was responsible for finding out who was in Delmore." "Well, your ghastly friend did. That thing is looking for someone in particular, remember? I'd wager it's one of them. The knight was a true Anglo-Daik, and I would swear the orc had an Anglo-Daik tattoo." Valissa snapped at the broken leader. "Excuses. I said you to take the town, and you used the opportunity to execute potential rivals to your leadership. If you had been more cautious in planning your attack, or more urgent in reaching Delmore in the first place, this likely would have been far less costly a battle." "Nevertheless," Gornath grunted, pointedly ignoring her observation and sitting once again, "they were there. The mage blew up their defenses as we were scaling them and nearly burnt me alive. The orc ruined my ballista too. We're going to need to rest a few days before we can move on." Valissa shook her head. "We have to move west and cut off the road to Gailakill, so that if the Nightcloaks miss whoever they're hunting, they won't escape them by moving inland. My men are in no shape to go anywhere." "Then move the ones who are. You have plenty of soldiers. Just cut off the damned road." Gornath grimaced and stood. "Very well, but only because I don't think it would be in my best interests to cross those Nightcloaks. As we move west, I'll try to replenish our numbers, but we need to make a decisive strike somewhere soon. My men tire of these petty spoils from villages." Valissa paused to consider this, but before she could speak, Hrothgar, who had been listening silently off to the side, walked up and said softly, "We could bypass the Dust Plains and strike the fortress of Aves sooner. Our approach has been too methodical, and the Eagle Knights will not expect us to ignore Gailakill and move against them so quickly. We'll catch them unawares, and more susceptible to our strike." Valissa looked at Hrothgar with renewed respect. "That's actually a rather intelligent plan, Hrothgar. I can't believe it came out of your mouth." Gornath nodded in agreement. "Attacking the fortress would give us the incentive my men need, and likely draw us more soldiers as well, but we need to resupply, and Gailakill will be ripe with food stores. Then we take a tribute from them to leave the town be," Hrothgar replied. "The sooner we destroy Aves, the sooner the whole region falls. We've burnt enough of this wretched land." Valissa turned to Gornath again. "How many soldiers can you get for me by the time we reach the fortress?" Perhaps another 6,000 men and double our number of gnolls if we're lucky. That would give us enough to storm the walls, so we will need siege engines to make quicker work of it. I believe the gnolls can break the gate down once we wear out the defenders and the battlements, although I've never seen the fortress myself. Hrothgar tapped his bow confidently. With my archers covering them, we should be able to get the gnolls to the gate unmolested. A few ballistae and other siege weapons would also make shorter work of the matter. Gornath rubbed his chin in thought. Perhaps we can put the people of Gailakill to work constructing those as well. We'll sort out the details when we reach the town. Ballista waved her hand to indicate the discussion was over. It's settled. We march to the fortress of Aves with all speed. No more raids unless absolutely necessary. That should give us the decisive victory Wolfbane is looking for. When it is finished, we'll come back and occupy the towns and settlements we left behind. Their impromptu meeting concluded, the three split off to their respective tents to rest. Within the town, the broken army set fire to the homes and trees, burning everything that could be put to the torch. They let their dead rot where they fell, as they ran through the roads, demolishing everything before them in a terrible orgy of violence. Fights broke out among the pillagers, some ending in death. Yet even as they tore down the remnants of the town, they heard through rumor that bigger targets and greater spoils were coming soon. In the dark of the night, in flickering flames of Delmore's destruction, the tide of murder built to a boil in anticipation of the coming of an even more extensive slaughter. Lena Edgrove had never envisioned herself as anything even remotely resembling a heroine, nor had she ever truly planned to engage in any activity one might mistake for an adventure, but she had always been a bold and brave woman. Perhaps it should come as no surprise that it was her family home that sheltered the king in exile. Lena had always been a bit of an outsider. She had cared for both her parents for many years before they passed away, managing the bakery while also maintaining the living quarters attached to it. Lena was only 16 when both her father and mother died. Though Angudeus was home to far less criminal activity than many nations, there was always the threat of hostile takeover through aggressive would-be land barons or opportunistic merchants. Lena had fended them all off and refused the hands of a great many men whose families had hoped to wed her and, through marriage, obtain her estate and business. She dismissed most of the suitors outright, entertained the few that interested her, and made it clear that she alone would be remaining in control of the bakery and its spacious living quarters. Her encounter with Logan had been by chance, in his and her mind perhaps more the hand of fate, and that he had treated her as a person with whom he could argue, laugh, and wonder at the world was what set Logan apart. He had tried to hide and, when hiding soon failed, dismissed his noble heritage as immaterial when around her. Lena had chastised him for his foolishness, since she saw his denial of who he was to be wasteful. She had been able, from the first, to discern Logan's character and impressed upon him the importance of honesty with her, but moreover with himself. It had opened up a new world to him and been the root of their love, which had led to the separation upon Varasho's discovery of the scandal. However, that had not prevented the birth of Lena and Logan's son, who she had in absence of her beloved named after his father. In motherhood, Lena had expected she might change or soften from her brash and outspoken ways, but it had only made her more sure of her convictions, even as she prayed for Logan's safe return to meet the child he did not know existed. For his part, this particular morning was, by far, the most exciting breakfast in young Logan Edgrove's life. Not only had he learned that he could finally talk about his father openly, but it turned out that his father was not just any knight, he was a prince. Moreover, that made the younger Logan something like a prince himself, or so he thought. He was still youthful enough to not truly understand how these things worked. He did know that now, most importantly, he was sitting at his mother's table with the heroes of his homeland. Giddy with excitement, the young boy was seated between High Lords Calavar and Arindian, kicking his heels against the bench, and looking wide-eyed back and forth between the two of them. He liked Calavar the best. The High Lord was noisy, and therefore very amusing. Calavar had nephews, grandnephews, to be frank, but none of his own children. He was a little uncomfortable with this youth, who he had just learned was the grandson of his good friend and king, Arvadas. Still, the boy amused him almost as much as he entertained the boy. The two were already well on their way to becoming fast friends. Arindian sat quietly on the right of the child, sipping his tea and thinking away. Despite being the youngest of the present High Lords, he knew it was his responsibility to come up with a plan and account for every possible impediment to their success. Even when he was a young man still deep in scholarly studies, the king had asked his opinion on everything. Arindian had a habit of reasoning things out completely, and such a skill was being put to the test on a grand scale now. Arvadas was at the head of the table, flanked by Varasho and Lena. The matron of the house had her most important patient, Renan Ordlan, nearest to her, but spent more time chiding Calavar about restraining his temper lest he reopen the stitches on his face. The High Lord, who could strike fear in the proudest and most seasoned of paladins, was perfectly contrite before the young woman. Women were not Calavar's strong suit, and frankly he was petrified of them. Renan, by contrast, was far more at ease and appeared to be feeling much better. He was now eating in great amounts and had been able to move about slowly on his own. All had agreed that the rescue was a rousing success, but the celebration had begun to recede as they considered the challenge of retaking the throne. "We ought to just storm the damned city and take that Vendile snake out by his forked tongue," Lena shot Calavar a warning glance as she chided him. Mind your own tongue in my house, High Lord. My child is not to be exposed to such language. Runidan was immediately apologetic. Forgive me, my lady, heat of the moment. You understand. Meridian cleared his throat and said calmly, Perhaps we ought to consider a course of action that does not involve assets we are lacking, like an army to storm a city. Barasho shrugged. We have some house guards, and Renan may know others sympathetic to our cause. The young knight, looking far better than he had when they had arrived at Lena's house, shook his head in response. For better or worse, my lord, a soldier is trained to follow orders. I disobeyed out of devotion to my king. Most of my peers will continue to fight for Bremer, even if it goes against their beliefs. It's the way of the military. Calavar nodded his grudging agreement with Renan's assessment. Arvada sipped his tea and posed a question. Perhaps we ought to consider entering the city by devious means once again. Graham, returning from behind the counter with some rolls for him and Derek, grunted. Sneaking around isn't much my style, my lord. I would prefer a straight-on fight. Even if we could get back in, where do we go if we were to go unseen? We're not exactly faces that can easily hide. Arvadas nodded. What my son says is truest of all. A king is hard to keep a secret, never mind two high lords and a prince. The boy spoke up, trying hard to get involved. But Grandpa, if you're really the king, can't you just parade into your palace like in the stories? Lena shushed him. Logan, do not interrupt. No, wait. Meridian set his tea down suddenly and sat up, steepling his fingers as the idea crystallized in his mind. He's right. All eyes turned to the young High Lord, and Arvadas said ruefully, Really, Fremont, I would not expect you to fall into the romance of this whole thing. This is a serious business, staging a coup. Erindian waved him silent. First, it's not a coup if you're still the rightful king, and second, the boy is right. Has not the word spread throughout the kingdom of your death, Arvadas? Rasho sat up and placed his palms on the table in disbelief. You want us just to march into Alderlast and into the palace like we never left? That's precisely what I want us to do. They all sat in silence as they contemplated the words of the High Lord. Renan shook his head. Sorry, my lord, but I fail to see how getting ourselves captured in such a grandiose way will avail. Erindian laughed. We're not going to be captured. Look, the only difficulty is getting through the gates, as they will have guards. Once we're in the city, we'll be fine. Barasho's eyes widened as the plan dawned on him. By Paladinus' sword, it could work. Arvadas looked at his son. Please, someone, explain to me how? Barasho smiled at his father. You said it yourself once. The people love you. They still do. And they assuredly do not love Vendile. They'll flock to you. They'll escort us to the very steps of the palace. More so because they believe you to be dead, and your return will seem a miracle to many, and disprove Vendile's lies, that he is no doubt spreading as the reason for your demise. Once we reach the palace, you can reveal the dark machinations of Vendile, and win back the kingdom, Meridian said decisively. With the people behind us, he'll not stand a chance. The king sat silently considering the proposition, but in the end, it was not he who made the decision. Graham snorted loudly, so loudly he brought the attention of the entire table upon himself. Recovering, he muttered, Well, it's a daft plan, that much is certain, which is probably why it'll work. Walk into the heart of enemy territory, hope we can rally a city behind us? I'm all for it. Derek concurred with Zelda, as did the rest of the table. Arvada sat still a moment longer, and then he too gave his assent. Lena, please see if I could buy some horses off the people of your village. We have a throne to recover. Deep night had settled in the blink of an eye. A great horned owl sat in the branches of her tree, stretching luxurious wings as she prepared for a long evening of hunting. In the swiftly gathering darkness, the hunter was queen, gazing out in the deep black, searching for prey. Suddenly, an unsettling calm came over the woods, and the hunter froze. A black wind swept past the owl's roost, and the creature that normally owned the night crept back into the hollow safety of her tree. Fear had more than wings this night, and there would be no hunting. South from where the owl was cowering, a lone figure strolled down the road like he was in the midst of a fine summer day. Trem whistled an old tune, the name of which he'd forgotten, and tapped his sword blade against his shoulder to the rhythm. For all his relaxed posturing, his eyes roved the black before him in earnest. For the others, this darkness would have been impenetrable, but for him it was not so bleak. He could make out the moving creatures about him darting from tree to tree and cutting before him across the road. Trem ambled about carelessly, feeling unburdened as a dangerous relaxation settled over him. He heard the hooves, but they were so quiet he knew he had not been intended to. Nevertheless, Trem's senses were unspeakably strong, and he stopped, knowing instinctively that these were the ones he sought. Raising his hand, he made a sharp gesture to his right and left, praying the others could see him in the dark and would move as quietly as they could to the cover of trees along the road. Trem continued to whistle and tap his sword as he stood in the center of the cart tracks, impatiently waiting for things to begin. The night about him was utterly silent, with dark clouds blotted out stars and moon. Trem stood straining his eyes before him, waiting for some glimpse of his enemy. The riders slowed, having heard him as well. They crept up painstakingly, materializing slowly and eerily from the gloom, but soon it was plain that he had already spotted them long ago and was unafraid. There were a great number of them, far more than Trem had anticipated. Their black shrouds hung about their eerie, shifting limbs, and the emaciated horses shook silent manes of wilting hair. Trem tried to pierce the folds of their cloaks with his eyes to see if they wore armor, but he could not tell. A lack of armor would have been nice, if likely irrelevant, advantage. He had thought he might slice through a few of them with less trouble, though it would not be his blade that did the damage. The leader moved his undead horse closer to the half-elf, and turned so he could look down on him from the saddle. Then, to Trem's surprise, it dismounted. In swift succession, the rest followed suit. Trem made a rough count as they did, and realized to his dismay there were 12 of the cloaked beings this time. The lead shade paused a moment, then reached upward and removed its hood. Trem took in the white skin shining in the faint moonlight and highlighted with many raised scars and odd symmetrical patterns. The others kept their faces hidden too, but Trem found one was unnerving enough. Its eyes were bottomless, black pools that seemed to bore through him. Determined to not show his fear, Trem spoke first. "Are you afraid I'm going to injure your mount?" The undead figure did not move, but waited, then said slowly, methodically, "You have come. Alone. This is supposed to be noble. You wish to spare your friends. You're just barely enough sport for me. I do not want them in the way." The thing's mouth opened slightly, revealing another empty black hole, and an echoing laughter issued forth. "You may have the sword of Elbok, but we are many. You will die. Stand aside and be spared. You're not the one we seek." "I have a different idea. You turn around, and I'll let the rest of your filthy band go with you, heads and limbs still attached." The figure shifted, and Trem saw it draw its blade. "Enough. You bore me. Die." Trem lunged forward first, howling, "Eldath du Haken." As he sprang towards them, the woods about the shades seemed to explode. From all around, the adventurers struck. Joven came first, gamely hurling at two of the creatures, his mighty swing hewing the gauntlet from one and taking the hand with it, though fortuitously sparing his blade. The blow exposed the white appendage that fell freely to the ground before melting away and quickly reforming. The second creature deflected Joven's second attack, and the battle was joined. Neep came streaking out of the trees to assail the shades closest to Trem, dagger in one paw and her sword clutched in the other. Logan and Grimtooth took one apiece from the back of their party, driving them into the rest. Ghost, recalling the damage striking one had caused his last sword, hurled the knife as he rushed forward, and parried two swift strikes from a pair of shades. Wrath held back, firing a bolt into the crowd that disarmed one of the creatures. As they hadn't got the kill, the shades moved most unnaturally. They seemed to teleport in short spurts from one place to the next, their forms so incorporeal and difficult to track that they were able to flank and put off balance the ambushers fairly swiftly. They seemed also to move in concert with one another, appearing and reappearing in coordinated efforts to confuse their foes. The battle was even for the moment, but every shift it seemed the fell beings would gain the upper hand. Then from deep in the woods the companions heard chanting, and suddenly a red-hot beam of energy shot out and burned through two of the cloaked devils. There was a deafening shriek, and then the folds of the robes collapsed into the ground. The destruction of the shades only seemed to strengthen their fellows, and they redoubled their efforts against the ambush. Joven was finding himself hard-pressed against the onslaught of the two shades that had singled him out. His injured leg was on the verge of giving way, and only his will was keeping it underneath him. Logan saw the young prince's plight and shouted to Grimtooth, "Help him!" The orc was engaged with his own foe, but in his desperation to assist Joven, he launched himself into the shade, assailing him and breezed past it. A long slash opened on his arm as he passed, but he did not notice. Grimtooth arrived in time to distract one of the shades attacking Joven on the left. Ghost appeared, as if out of nowhere, beside the young man, and together they beat off his attackers just in time to turn and face the two still pursuing the Napoleon. Trem was surrounded, swinging away at four of the monsters at once. His burning blade kept them at a distance, but with so many they were soon to overcome him. Neep arrived in time to provide a distraction, spinning away from her own foe to attack the rear of those flitting or moving about Trem, but soon the two were forced to retreat as the shadowy, nimble creatures honed in on the sound of Diaga's chanting and sought to kill the mage. Trem shouted above the clash of blades, "Rally, rally! Put the road to our backs, together now!" Ghost hefted most of Javanileth's weight on his shoulder, and the two made a hopping dash to the half-elf. Logan, cut off from the rest, put his head down and rushed forward, his armor deflecting most of the blows, but when he reached the others he was cut in several places. The foul blades of the shades burned his skin and about the wounds they inflicted, and Grimtooth and Logan were placed behind the others while they tried to halt the spread of the damage. Diaga stepped forward to join the rest, his simple metal staff glowing spectacularly now as he held it towards the black-clad enemies. The beam of light pushed back the shades a moment, but they gathered to strike again. Trem braced himself when Joven gasped, "Where is Wrath?" The same thought was in Trem's mind when the shades closed suddenly, but just before they reached the beleaguered defenders, the assassin appeared before them, holding a strange vial aloft. The advance halted sharply, and the monsters shrieked in dismay as Wrath cast the vessel to the ground. The noise was deafening, and the light that exploded forth was blinding. The companions were thrown back several steps but kept their feet. The shades, on the other hand, seemed to expand and then rapidly dissolve. They could be heard howling in rage, but their now vaporous forms were gone, streaking outward in the night, and then nothing remained. Wrath was hunched over his crossbow, where he'd been standing, his black cloak and robes smoking. Slowly the dark figure stood and turned, stumbling back towards the others. Logan stepped forward to aid him, but the assassin curtly pushed him away. "Leave me, knight. It will pass." Trem stepped forward then. You could have warned us it was going to do that. Rat's eyes leapt up to meet his, and the assassin's voice was cold. I told you what you needed to know, nothing more or less. Trem didn't attempt to stop the strange man as he roughly shoved past him, but instead regarded Logan and Grimtooth. Can you make it to the caves? Grimtooth shrugged nonchalantly. I've had far worse. Logan simply nodded. Ghost was helping Joven back, and much to the youth's surprise, scolding him sternly like an annoyed father. The next time you're too hurt to fight, stay out of the way. You're going to get yourself killed sometime, and I'm not here to save you. Javenileth glanced at the Napoleon. So why bother saving me at all? The older man snorted loudly. You're not half bad with a sword, boy. Don't flatter yourself by thinking I care. And to emphasize his point, Ghost released the prince and moved towards his massive horse. Joven caught himself and watched him a moment before hobbling forward to his own smaller gelding. Trem brought up the rear, practically carrying Diaga. The young mage's eyes were rolling in odd directions, though he was still coherent. I think I may have pushed my limits a bit today. You should be all right. We can strap you to the horse. Neep will lead it where we are going. I don't want to slow us down. It doesn't matter. The danger's gone for now. Wrath materialized from the darkness before them. No, half-elf. The creatures are simply separated from our plane for a time. They will return, and we should be going now. Trem paused to lock eyes with the assassin, attempting to assess how much of a threat there was in his words. Then he helped Diaga into his saddle, and the party began to ride south. Edge awoke slowly. He could feel a strange numbness in his body, a sort of dead warmth. Opening his eyes, he was surprised to see only brightness, but nothing else. Then Edge realized the whiteness was snow, and he was buried in it. Moving slightly, he brought his head out from under the soft blanket, and he could see the fire had gone out, and both Roman and Raymir were asleep in strange mounds like his own. The fire had not been dead long, as it was still sending small tendrils of smoke skyward. Ed glanced toward what he thought was Roman, and saw the older man was sleeping upright. Apparently, or otherwise, he would have been completely still for several hours. As swiftly as he dared, Edge heaved himself upwards. The snow had kept him warm by holding in his body heat, but at the same time it had dampened his clothes. They would need more kindling. Testing his leg in the snow, Edge began a painstaking march away from the camp, to roughly where he thought Roman had found wood earlier. Not far from the encampment, he looked back and realized he could not see it in the gentle snowfall. In a slight panic, he glanced down and was relieved to see he could still follow his footprints back, but not for long. He increased his pace as much as he dared. Moving further forward, he nearly toppled over the edge of the cliff. Glancing down, he froze as stiff as the cold wind about him. Climbing the cliff wall, like some kind of strange spider, was a robed figure. It was far enough away that Edge could not be certain, but he had no doubt it was Saltagan. How that frail wizard had managed to get this far, the lost elf had no idea, but he was moving at a frightening pace. Edge forgot all about wood and spun around, willing himself to run back. Edge shook Roman hard, knocking all the snow from him. The older man was awake instantly, and with his sword drawn, but Edge put a finger to his lips and whispered, "On the cliff." Roman did not ask questions. He tossed some snow over the ashes of the fire and put his back to Raymir and Edge, watching the sheer rock face below for signs of the mad mage. Edge roused Raymir and whispered softly the same warning to her. Raymir's eyes widened, and she stiffened in his arms, but Edge held her tighter, and she relaxed. Raymir spoke quietly. "What do we do?" Edge helped her up. "We climb." Iceblade became more punishing as the travelers got higher and higher up its massive form. Roman brought up the rear, backpedaling occasionally. He could not have slept more than a few hours, but he was alert and taut with energy and anticipation. Edge was in the lead, his legs seemingly healed as he forged ahead with newfound strength born of necessity. Raymir trailed him, looking around in search of easier paths to the top as they moved onward, and pointing them out where she could. Roman thought he saw a shadow come over the ledge they had occupied earlier, but he said nothing. Edge was at a blistering pace, and they were surely increasing the distance between themselves and the crazed wizard. Edge paused momentarily as they reached the end of the steep path he'd found. They had run out of easy options. Roman came up beside him and craned his neck upward. The cliff had few handholds, and it was at least 100 feet of vertical rock to the next outcrop they could stand on. Roman looked at Edge and then Raymir. He and Edge wordlessly weighed their options, and the older man shrugged. Edge pulled out his halberd and gripped it from the end of the haft, took a massive swing, aiming for one of the gaps in the rock. The balancing spike struck the heavy stone, but did not remain. The sound echoed off the mountain, and Roman flinched at the noise, but Edge steadied and swung again. Again the sound reverberated off the cliffs, but this time the spiked metal opposite the halberd's axe blade stuck. Edge took a deep breath and grabbed Raymir about the waist. "Hold on to me." The lost elf began to climb. He heaved his weight and Raymir's up the cliff almost by will alone. Somehow the haft of his weapon did not snap, nor did it come free of the rock. Beside them, Roman had pulled out his dagger, and in similar fashion to Edge, though far more slowly, was battling his way up the cliff, using his dagger to find purchase where hand and footholds were not present. Raymir was stunned by the sheer power of Edge as he went hand over hand up the wooden haft, driving his legs when he was able. When he reached the axe head, he grasped a small handhold firmly, planted his feet, and pulled the weapon loose. Gripping it closer to the blade, he drove it to the rock again and continued to climb, driving the spike deep to form a handhold whenever he needed one. It went on for what seemed to Raymir an eternity. Edge kept dangling by one hand, often without resting his feet on anything, and again he slammed his weapon into the mountainside. Finally, they reached the outcrop, and Edge set Raymir down. Turning, he lowered his polearm to Roman, who sheathed his sword and gripped it gratefully. Edge seemed to pull him up effortlessly. They paused a moment to catch their breath, and Edge glanced up to the next supportable part of the cliff and picked up his weapon. Come on, we can't rest yet. Oh, sorry. Neither argued with him. The unstoppable Lost Elf started his climb once again, Raymir clinging gamely to his shoulders. He heaved himself up hand over hand with a deathly calm. Roman kept up as best he could, his pursuit futile but valiant. They reached the second resting point a little slower than before, once again waiting for Roman, but eventually they were all safely standing against the snow and stone. Edge insisted that they rest longer than before so Roman could recover. The entire time he kept peering over the lip of the edge to see if they were being followed, but there was no pursuit in sight. Roman tapped him on the shoulder after a few more minutes, and they both looked up. The final point they could bivouac was at the farthest yet, nearly twice as long a climb as the others had been. Edge looked at him. Can you make it? Roman snorted and began to haul himself up the cliff. Edge waited until he had a significant start. Then he hefted Raymir one last time and ready to swing. Before he could strike, she kissed him hard on the cheek. He looked at her in surprise. For luck, she said. Edge shook his head. You should not distract me like that. And then he grinned. The moment was short-lived. The rock face was more jagged than the one before, offering more opportunities to grasp at stone with hands, and not the need the aid of their weapons, but the climb was farther and the strain was constant. Roman seemed driven to stay ahead of the other two, though he was not supporting Raymir as Edge was. About halfway to the top, Raymir sensed Edge weakening and released her hold on him, grabbing the rock face herself with one hand and setting her feet. Despite his protest, she clenched his cloak tightly in her free hand and heaved upward, trying to propel him further. It seemed to inspire a new burst of energy in the Lost Elf, which allowed him to surge past her before taking her on his shoulders once again. As they neared the top, he lobbed his weapon over the edge and scrambled upward. They caught Roman, breathing hard, at the edge of the outcrop. Edge allowed Raymir to clamber over him and grabbed his friend, heaving him up after her. Edge then pulled himself up and collapsed next to the others. Roman was still short of breath, and Raymir felt tired just from the strain of holding on to Edge. The three lay there in the now clear sky and looked out at the frozen reach, and beyond, the part of the waste sometimes called the Empty Lands. The great expanse of frozen ground stretched on forever beneath them, occasionally interrupted with jutting rocks. Edge found himself surprised and a little proud they had crossed so much treacherous terrain in so short a time. Raymir rested her head on his shoulder, and Roman, unable to stay awake, began snoring loudly to his left. The Lost Elf glanced to both sides and allowed himself a small smile. Had he made it here alone, it would not have been as sweet. With Raymir and now Roman, he felt he had preserved something of the faith in mortal kind Wolfbane had once had. Algathor had demanded that he protect his granddaughter, and Edge knew he would do so. Once this twisted spire had been found, they'd brave the dangers of its secrets. Edge would take Raymir somewhere south, perhaps the lands of Dragon's Watch, where he'd heard so much about. They could live there in peace and harmony for as long as they waited. For as long as they wanted. Of Roman, Edge was not so certain. He was a spy from a town in the former Napoleon Empire still dedicated to the resurrection of that nation. Roman would need to return home before he could think about ending his heroic travels. Looking at him, Edge reconsidered his own motivation. He owed Algathor his promise, but he owed Roman his life many times over. He would have to help him get home at the very least. The thought of all this, so far ahead, made Edge rub the haft of his halberd thoughtfully. When he had first met Wolfbane, the great warrior had showed him the axe and told him, "You look at this, Edge. This is a weapon. But before it ever struck a man, it was made to cut wood or keep him warm. The weapon is not responsible for the death it causes. The wielder is. Eventually, we all want to put aside the killing weapon and pick up the useful tool." Edge looked at his own deadly instrument up and down. Today had been the most useful it had proven to him. Today it had saved the lives of those he cared about, without taking the life of someone he did not know. Deep inside, Edge dreamed of a day when he would never need to harm another mortal for any reason. As sharply as that thought came, so did another of Wolfbane's early teachings. If you take this weapon, you sign your fate. To live a life in which you will kill, and will always kill more than you will work to preserve the living. Become a warrior, Edgeworth, and you will embrace what it means to be one. You'll never be able to let go of the weapon all your life if you take it now. Edge had considered what his master had said, then without hesitation he reached out and plucked the halberd from his hand. In his memory he could vividly see Wolfbane's expression as he did so. His long black hair and neatly trimmed beard seemed to contort in an expression of sudden sadness, as though he'd wanted Edge to refuse the fate he'd consigned him to. Then he placed a hand on the young student's shoulder and whispered, "Learn this thing well, Edgeworth Elbach. It's the only companion you will ever have for all of your days." Atop the high cliffs of Iceblade, Edge began to rethink what Wolfbane had said. He was not alone now, and the halberd was not his only companion. He had friends, and he had loved, and he had fought and bled for them as they had for him. This was not the same fate Wolfbane had accepted. Edge would not allow his warrior side to overtake his entire soul. He would be a companion first and a combatant second. In that moment, he chose to honor this new vision for his life by pulling Rhaegar just a little closer. That's chapter 25. I'm going to make a quick adjustment to the lighting and my sitting position, and then I'll come back for 26. So, muting and pausing, switching over to the other screen for a second. Okay. Brief hiatus. Chapter 26. Vendile sat bent upon his new menacing throne in the palace of Alderlast, holding his crownless head up with one bejeweled hand. Freyn stood before him as he awaited his lord's reaction to the latest news surrounding Arvadas' escape. Freyn had personally investigated the evasion of Vendile's guards and happened upon the truth of the matter. Beyond the betrayal of Rhiannon, which Gwemmer continued to insist could not possibly have been true, their foes had managed to use secrets known only to them to escape the palace from the dungeons. Freyn, for his part, was a little troubled by this, but Vendile had gone into a long period of furious and possibly fearful silence. The rumors that Varasho Hawking had played a part in the escape had done nothing to absolve Gwemmer's fault in all of this. In truth, the blame for Vendile's current predicament fell squarely on the shoulders of the High Lord, but Freyn was all too familiar with the reality. But the messenger was often the one to receive the brunt of his new king's anger. Freyn twirled his robes along his newly commissioned and unwanted fingers along his newly commissioned and unwanted purple robes, bracing himself for the unpredictable reaction. Vendile picked up his head and glanced about the throne room as if in a daze. Then he stood and descended the dais in his soft velvet slippers, all the while rubbing his dark goatee thoughtfully. Freyn managed to avoid moving from his spot as he approached, and the maniacal king began to pace before him. So they escaped, all three, but not through my men. Yes, my lord. But, Vendile murmured thoughtfully, no one knows that they are out. They've not been seen, and they took a passage which you believe has not been used in over 1,000 years. Freyn shifted. We may expect, my lord, that they perished in the tunnel. The chamber it is rumored to lead to is perilous, at least according to the records I was able to access in the king's library. It is fortunate I have you around for such things, Freyn. Scholarly work is contrary to the role of the king in my eyes. More important matters concern me of late. The king lifted his arm and slowly selected a chalice from the many gaudy vessels atop the table standing at the foot of his throne. Sipping carefully, he turned his eyes back on his former seer. What should we do differently, Freyn? My crowning by Hladic must be done, and swiftly, so as to cement my reign. Freyn removed a small roll of paper from his sleeve. This may aid you, my lord. By announcing the execution of Arvadas Angledeus and the other High Lords for crimes against the state, you may upset the populace, but you will put the nail in the coffin of any resistance that might arise. You will have justice on your side, and they were dealt with as a reason for protecting the kingdom. Once our peace agreement with the invaders is announced, you will be responsible for stabilizing the nation of Angledeus, where your predecessor only cost the lives of her citizens. You will appear a true hero, and none will see any reason to oppose you. Vendile took another sip of his wine and smiled happily. This plan, Freyn, is excellent. It will give me the power I desire and minimize the resistance. You can send in the incompetents now. We must find and eliminate Arvadas as fast as possible in order to complete this takeover. I cannot have him appearing suddenly, at a later date, and making me look a fool. Freyn bowed low. As you wish, my lord. Take this. It outlines your speech, as you should read it this afternoon. I've already instructed Geladan Gwemmer to round up a sizable crowd for your coronation ceremony, so that your support will appear strong, and to encourage word to spread rapidly of Arvadas' execution among the people of Alderlast. Once enough of them know of his demise, it will not matter how many went of their own accord to your crowning. They will soon realize you are the rightful king. Freyn handed Vendile the slip of parchment from his robes and turned to leave. The massive throne room doors swung open slowly as the guards heaved them apart. On the other side, Gwemmer and Brucius Hladic were waiting in their ceremonial robes. Gwemmer had a visible amount of sweat on his balding head, and his already ruddy complexion seemed even worse than before as he walked nervously inside. Hladic appeared calm but wary as he approached Vendile. He would be there to crown him this afternoon, so any potential punishment of him would have to at least be delayed. At the time, however, both suspected Gwemmer might have slipped up badly enough to not survive this latest error. Vendile turned slowly toward them as they bowed low. Freyn gave a small bow to the would-be monarch from the doorway and swept out of the room in search of news from the ceremony. Gwemmer shifted his crimson robes and adjusted his ruby-hilted sword in an attempt to keep from making eye contact with Vendile. The king laughed loudly and sharply, causing the High Lord to jump. Gwemmer, do not fear. Death would be too simple for you, and a messy beginning to a reign, particularly when I've already killed 2 High Lords and a king today. The general looked confused, but Hladic allowed himself a small smile as he caught wind of the king's plan. The obese priest leaned on his staff of white oak and chuckled as he tried to contain himself. My lord, this is a truly brilliant solution. Of course it is, you ignorant fool. Stifle that despicable laugh of yours. Vendau sighed deeply. I honestly do not know why I took you two in as my accomplices in this little coup. One of you let the former king get away from his guards after you sent a traitorous soldier to kill his son, and the other thinks my plan is clever, yet he has not offered up any of his own ideas to solve my problems. The two Highlords remained silent as Vendau drained his glass and set it back down on the small end table with his bejeweled counterparts. He paused to dab at his mouth with a handkerchief and spun towards them, swirling his violet robes and eyeing them severely. You have none to suggest still, I assume. Boehmer made as if to respond, but thought the better of it. Platek cleared his throat awkwardly, but also said nothing. Vendau sighed and strode commandingly towards them, glaring darkly. I should not have to rely solely on my own brilliance to overcome this problem. Platek, while you may see the ease with which this solution solves our little quandary, Brother Boehmer appears at a loss, and I cannot debase myself by explaining, so you shall do it for me. The sallow-faced priest turned towards his counterpart. He's going to announce that Hawking was successfully executed, along with Arindian and Calabar, for treason and attempted escape from the justice. Boehmer furrowed his brow. But they escaped. What if the people hear of that? Vendau placed a gloved hand on the Highlord's shoulder. I have it on good authority that their escape route was impassable. Boehmer was still skeptical as he fingered his signet ring. But if they should emerge... Silence! Vendau delivered a brutal backhand to the puzzled Highlord's face. They are deceased, or as good as so by now. We will proceed with the coronation as planned. I trust you managed to fulfill the simple task you were assigned and gather me a large crowd for the coronation. Boehmer wiped the blood from his mouth in stunned silence. Even when Arvadas Hawking had disagreed vehemently with his profit-making war propositions, he never struck his counterpart. Their disagreements had been volatile, but never violent, and Hawking had never even seemed to treat Boehmer as an equal. His already slow brain now thoroughly fogged, Boehmer muttered his response. Yes, Your Majesty. I had to pull away most of the guards to protect the ceremony. However, the main gates of the city are practically untended. Vendau waved this away. It matters not. There's no one coming from beyond my walls. I need the crowd controlled and quelled, so that I can resume my reign without complaint or resistance. Platek stepped forward solemnly. I've ordered the entire priesthood there to see you crowned, my lord. We'll perform the largest high chant seen in this kingdom since we began the crowning of kings. Your holy coronation will go down in history as the greatest ever. Vendau nodded as he stroked his small beard. Yes, and with Galden and Zarenth under house arrest, I can control the grain and the construction of the new Alderlast. Galden will begin by withholding much of his crop to drive up prices, enough to fund the grand renovations I have planned for this city under Zarenth's master architects. But that will come in time. The first thing I will be to appoint someone to Fremont Arindian's post who can record the executions as necessary actions undertaken to defend the sanctity of Angledeus. Arvadas Hawking will go down in history as what he was, a handcuff on the rightful future of our kingdom. I will be the nation's savior. Boehmer and Platek were silent as Vendau stood there staring beyond them into a dark future only he could fathom. In the deepest recesses of their minds, they contemplated what might become of their home, but they would not allow those thoughts to creep to the surface, where they might take vivid form and show the affronts to tradition and Angledaic values and all the horrible profanity they might express. The two shifted nervously, unwilling to depart until dismissed, but clearly uncomfortable at remaining before their fearful leader. Vendau seemed to recover from his dread imaginings, and his gaze fell down on his co-conspirators. His blackened eyes, ringed in circles that told of many sleepless nights, took a moment to register their figures as the imaginings departed, and the present rushed back to him. With a snarl and a shake of his head, he cried, Go! Prepare the people for my coming. This shall be the greatest moment of Angledaic history, at least until the dawn of a new realm, under my bold guidance. The two Highlords departed swiftly to carry out their respective duties. Vendau listened to the heavy doors slam behind them, and paused to linger before his throne. That Angledeus was his was difficult to process still. There seemed a piece somehow missing to his conquest, and he could sense what it was. He wanted Arvadas' body before him. He wanted to spit in the face that had constrained his power for so long, and laugh as he sat on the symbol of his victory, with a prostrate form before him. And he could not, so the conquest of Angledeus was incomplete, and always would be. His rule was nothing without being able to see the destruction of his despised enemy. This kingdom was not entirely his so long as Arvadas lived, in the memory, especially as he lived on in the memory of the people. It will pass, Vendau whispered. I shall destroy all memory and burn my own truth in the souls of all people. I'll have dominion over hearts and minds. I will be lord of the greatest realm in history. The king sat heavily on his throne and rubbed his temples, trying to push his thoughts through the strange fog that seemed to cloud them. He reached to his breast and grasped the pendant resting there in an attempt to steady himself with its comforting presence. Vendau struggled in his seat a moment longer, then he seemed to become aware of himself and rose. Straightening his robes, he turned and walked unsteadily out of the throne room to dress himself for the coronation. At the gates of Alderlast, only a few guards, mostly young and newly raised, up to the responsibility of their appointment, were on duty. The majority had been pulled away for Vendau's ceremony, and these few were considered too green and impressionable to understand the importance of containing the crowd at all costs. Most Anglo-Dacians did not agree with the coronation of Vendile, but the veterans knew what could happen if the succession was not carried out quickly and smoothly. The near civil wars of many years past were a testament to the importance of continuity. High lords had orchestrated the rise and fall of their own many times, and in each instance the feuds had nearly spilled over into open conflict. No Anglo-Dac intentionally mentioned the clandestine bloodletting that had accompanied these days when the nation stood at the edge of anarchy, unless required. But the chaos of such periods lingered in every studious mind, and had been carefully catalogued by Rendian's historians. This was a nation that should have stood for order and honor, and it was difficult to defend those ideals when the past contained events that were such an obvious affront to the nation's values. Arvadus had emphasized to his sons that these tribulations had forged stronger men who knew their mortal flaws, though it had not made the evils of the past any easier to digest. These young men now on guard were fearful of their future. They had grown up under Arvadus and admired him. He was a fair and just ruler and widely regarded as the most personable king Anglo-Daeus had ever had. They believed the older soldiers who spoke of his wisdom, and they were most afraid of what those veterans would not say. The experienced men would not offer any thoughts on Vendile or his character. They were simply mute on the subject. This unnerving fact kept the young guards on their toes, concerned that there was something coming they were not prepared for. And in this estimate, they were correct. The city of Alderlast is formed of a massive octagon with 8 gates. At the center of each segment of the curtain wall and at each joint, further walls extend to the center of the city, the palace. Thus, should the city be under siege, it could be fought for in sections, limiting the ability of any foe to take all of Alderlast at once. During times of civil unrest, Alderlast had indeed broken into independent districts, allied in blocks against one another, or used to contain uprisings among the people. The intent had always been that an ill-prepared invader would not understand the layout of the city, and thus fail to strike for its heart, the palace, before attempting to secure the streets themselves. By the time they realized such an undertaking was nigh impossible, it would be too late. Each of the spokes of the great wheel that made up the walls separating the districts formed a raised defensive road, all 8 leading to the elevated seat of the palace itself. The true trick to taking Alderlast, therefore, was not holding the districts, but the high roads forming the divisions between them and allowing access to the palace. The unique layout of the city was therefore a problem, but only for the ignorant invader. Arvadus Anglo-Daeus was not such a man, nor was his company. The ray rode straight to Alanormir's cradle, the gate that opened to a long ramp leading to the height of the Zenith Road, and paused outside, awaiting the hailing of the guards. Arvadus was in front in a gray cloak, his companions behind him similarly clad and looking particularly inconspicuous. Calavar and Arindian were immediately behind the king, Graham and Derek protectively at their sides. Horatio and Renon were behind, keeping Lena between them. Young Logan had been left at home, with promises of more visits from his grandfather and Uncle Calavar. The small company sat before the great gate, not making a sound. The young guards on duty were confused. They were accustomed to being greeted by travelers seeking entry and given the customary information about their origins and business in the city. These newcomers were behaving oddly, as they simply sat beyond the gate waiting. The discussion between the present watchmen was furtive and nervous. What to do? Should they send out a few men to detain the group in case they were there to disrupt the ceremony? Did they refuse to open the gates under any circumstances? No one on the wall was prepared to deal with even this apparently minor challenge to their authority. Finally, one of the bolder men on the wall adjusted his armor and, clearing his throat, took up a position on the battlements where he could be plainly seen. "Good day to you, travelers. What business have you here?" Arvadus kept his head low and covered. "We're here to witness this afternoon's ceremony. We heard of it as we rode toward the city." There was a pause in the wall as orders were relayed to the guard and he conversed with his companions. Assuming what he believed was an authoritative stance, the young man called, "No one is permitted to enter until the crowning ceremony is complete." "Under whose command do you oppose my entry?" The guard was puzzled. The word of High Lord Vendile, soon to be king of Anglo-Daeus. Arvadus tossed his hood back and pointed dramatically at the young man on the wall. "Then I overturn this order, as the rightful king, and demand you open the gates to my city so that I may take back what was wrongly stolen from me." The reaction on the wall was one of shock. Slowly the others removed their hoods, but began as murmurs rose on the wall to general hubbub. The word that all below were deceased had spread like wildfire through Alderlast, and yet here they stood. The young guard tried to reason with himself. "We cannot allow you in, my lord, as you are no longer the king." It was spoken in an apologetic, nearly pleading tone, and Arvadus responded calmly and sympathetically. "My title was wrested from me through deception and violence. I'm here to correct that violation. I will use force if necessary, but I do not think you're an enemy of our nation, my son." Calavar had his warhammer halfway out of his belt, but a remonstrating glare from Arindian halted him there. The guard on the wall seemed torn between law and loyalty, but he held fast. "I cannot go against the decree, my lord, by our code." Horatio trotted forward and pointed his staff at the man on the wall. "There are things higher than the code, boy. High Lord Vendile has not yet been appointed king, and his predecessor stands before you. Moreover, the man being crowned has violated that which sustains the purity and righteousness of our nation to bar us from entry. He's conspired to commit murder against men falsely accused and unfairly tried. To which is your allegiance, the code or what it stands to protect?" There was a brief pause, then the guard made a sharp motion to his companions. There was no hesitation. They rushed to hurl open the gates. The company rode through as the guards bowed to either side of them. Arvadas drew his sword and held it aloft. "If you wish to aid your country, follow me, my brothers, before the soul of our people is defiled through treachery." The guards filed in behind the riders, and soon a company of 20 men was marching behind the slow walk of the horses. Arvadas did not rush onward. He cast his grey cloak aside, and it fell to the street. With his newly won followers marching behind him, they now proudly displaying the bronze and white colors of his house. Calavar and Arindian shone behind him, glowing in their resplendent tunics, patched and cleaned with Lena's precise stitching. In their armor, Varasho and Renan were grim, as were the two guards, Derek and Graham, before them. Lena was proud in the center, with her dark velvet riding dress and long dark hair flowing softly in the breeze. She turned to Varasho. "I never thought you would denounce the code for any reason." The prince kept his eyes forward as he answered, "There's much about me you have misread, my lady." "That's good to hear." The march remained unhurried as they went past the roofs of the houses below, cries of recognition coming up from people in the districts. The sound of hooves on cobblestone attracted attention from homes. Those not coerced into viewing the ceremony leaned out of windows, craning their heads upward, and responded with awe at the sight before them. A great roar began to rise behind the king's return. The rumor of his arrival spread faster than the return could. Children clambered up the stairs to the raised road and ran before Arvadas, laughing and cheering the king. The old man could not restrain a smile. He felt as though he were reborn. In the past months, he had been crushed by the helplessness and isolation trying to rule his land. Now he realized that this new threat to his home had not been only his to face. The people were indeed with him, and they welcomed his apparent return from the grave. Arindian came beside his friend to bathe in his enjoyment of the moment. "It's nice to be home, Arvadas." The man before him turned calmly. "We're far from home. A great challenge awaits us at the end of the road." "Well," the younger man sighed, "we certainly will not be facing it alone." Arvadas glanced back at the sea of people following him. "Yes, that is something, isn't it?" Diaga fell asleep shortly into their ride south. Trem thought he might join the young mage, but he willed himself to stay awake. The night was dark and the road was winding before him, yet he could not say how much farther they had to go. Ghost led the way, unusually concerned about the others behind him. He often paused to retreat back to check out on the rest of the party. For the moment, it seemed he had forgotten his rapid desertion of them and his single-mindedness of purpose. Grimtooth had bound his wounds and Logan's for the time being, and the flesh about the cuts seemed to have stopped burning, but the orc felt compelled to check on them from time to time. Neep was awake and aware, keeping a close eye over Diaga's slumped form. Wrath had disappeared into the night, and Trim did not wish to speculate the reason why. Ghost materialized before him and spoke gruffly. "The people of Delmore just ahead. They opened the caverns and are waiting for us to go inside." Trem nodded weakly. "Send them in. We'll bring up the rear." "I can have the halfling seal it behind us," Ghost said. "Hopefully that'll buy us a little time." As the Napoleon started back towards the front of the line, Trem called out, "What have they done with Joseph, the old man, his body?" Ghost paused and turned. "I told them we'd build a cairn in the caverns. I thought you'd want to be present." Ghost trotted off before Trem could respond, leaving the half-elf confused at this rare kindness from the Napoleon, and feeling still more exhausted. His body seemed to want to collapse, and only his will to reach the relative safety held him in the saddle. Trem heard the approach of hooves and tilted his head to see Joven riding slowly behind him. The youth overtook him eventually and matched his pace. They did not speak for some time, simply riding forward into the gloom. Joven's face nodded in pain as his horse missed a step, and Trem reached out to steady the beast. Joven's hand came down on his and gently moved it off the reins. "I think I should steer my own horse, Trem." The former hermit brought his arm back, and the deep silence continued a few moments longer. Jovanaleth finally straightened himself, as though preparing for a battle, and spoke demandingly. "What are you?" Trem reacted as though struck, flinching from Joven's words, but recovering quickly. Moments of quiet passed before he was able to talk. "I don't really know. Joseph told me he knew you over 20 years ago. He said you looked exactly the same." Trem shifted uncomfortably. "He spoke the truth." Jovanaleth scoffed. "How's that possible? You can't be much older than me." Trem halted his horse and stared coldly at his companion. "I am 56 winters young. I was at the battle of the Fortress of Aves where, as you deduced, I took the sword once belonging to Vok de Nalvac. That's just not possible, Trem. It is, regardless of whether it should be possible, what other explanation could there be? And to what end would I wish to lie to you about something so fantastical?" Jovanaleth knew it was the truth, but the confirmation he had waited for still stunned him into silence. Trem did not give him the opportunity to probe or respond further. "When I was 18 years old, I entered a trance for several days. When I came out of it, my parents told me they had adopted me mere days after my birth. They were instructed by my mother to raise me to the age of 18, and then I would receive a powerful gift from the gods themselves. At that time, they were to tell me the truth. When I learned they were not my real parents, I resolved to find my true relatives, particularly my mother, who had abandoned me to the kindly couple I had long thought were my actual family."
I left them to search for my birth mother. I spent many years in various places before I stumbled upon the Fortress of Aves during the War of the Lion. I joined them as a scout when they were still desperate for volunteers, even though I had mixed blood. Through rash action and unhappy chance, I was given the opportunity to become a knight. I was at the final battle between Goran the Painted Knight and Bull the Warrior. I watched Bull kill the general from the west and then die himself. Afterwards, I walked away. I went to the woods and resolved never to leave. Joven was silent a moment, but managed to say, "And you met Joseph when?" "As a child, I read a great deal. I dreamt of being a hero. I even tried to join the Eagle Knights when I first left my foster parents. The racial restrictions then barred me, and soon I learned most men and elves despise those like you and I, who are proof of a mingling of our species. I kept my hope of becoming a man stories would be written alive in the dust plains for a long while. When I met Joseph, I had become known as the Warden of the Plains, a mysterious figure who wandered the hills protecting travelers." Trem's eye could not help lighting up as he spoke of his past, the times when he believed in the ideal of absolute good and evil, and worked in earnest to be a paragon of the former. In failing Joseph, I lost my childish belief in mythical heroes for a time. In truth, it would have been better if I lost it completely, but hope is a terrible thing. Jovenelith looked up and down at Trem as though seeing him for the first time. He was transfixed by this revelation. To think he was riding next to someone he had felt was his peer, only to learn he was more than twice his age, and had seen and done things that likely no other person in all of Testenir had. It was astounding. But more than that, his cold and despondent view of the world made somewhat more sense now. Joveneleth could connect the dots of his companion's failed adventures, understand the hurt and sadness he had to have experienced several times over, and most of all, he thought he understood what had made Trem venture forth on Joven's account. "Well," Trem said softly, head down, "anything else you would like to know?" After a moment, Joven cleared his throat. "Did you ever find your mother?" "No," Trem said quietly, "and I've given up searching." "Is that why you helped me?" "Because I'm looking for my father." Trem looked up, ashamed. "At first, I intended to leave you to die in the woods. I still do not know why I took you to my home. After I healed you, I felt a degree of responsibility for you. Your similar ordeal regarding a parent did strike a nerve, I suppose." Joven sighed, "Until we reached Delmore. I told you that I eventually lost the misguided notion that noble and ignoble actions, right and wrong, heroism and villainy, are things that one can draw a clear line between. I did not want the people of Delmore, or you and the others, to die. However, I saw no reason for us to sacrifice ourselves in a futile attempt to save them. And even now, I wonder if you or Logan have considered what will become of these people, where they will go, and what their future will be." Joven remained steadfast in his decision. "That'll be figured out in time. Innocent people cannot just be left to suffer and die when we have the ability to help them." He did, however, recognize the truth in Trem's misgivings, and chose to change the subject back to his odd ally. "What will you do now?" Trem shrugged. "Continue south, help Ghost, help you. That is, if you still want my help." Joven straightened himself and averted his eyes. "I don't even know who you are, Trem. For now we're traveling in the same direction, and I'll not object to your company. But once we found whatever it is Ghost seeks, perhaps we should go our separate ways." Trem was about to respond as Logan rode by with Ghost and Grimtooth on his heels. "Come on, the entrance is just ahead, and Rast says those things will be back before long." "Where is he?" Joven called. A shadow flitted past them. "Right beside you, Prince." Joveneleth spun and saw the tail of a black cloak as it disappeared into the night. He shook his head and turned to say something to Trem, perhaps to reassure him, and there was no one there. Joven sat in his saddle alone on the road, watching the long cloak of Trem Waterhound disappear before him. He adjusted his heavy broadsword and trotted his mount forward. The mass of humanity soon emerged ahead of him, crowded around a great thicket of trees, of which one seemed to loom over the rest. Joven could not see the cave from where he was, and in truth the mass of refugees drew his attention more than his other surroundings. The crowd of people at the cavern was disheveled and exhausted. There were mournful but faint wails throughout the refugees, in some cases just realizing that a loved one was not coming back to them. Joveneleth tried to remember the names of the men he'd commanded, but not one came to him. Something in that realization pierced his heart as he sat there, drained of all his emotional fortitude, with eyes averted lest he begin weeping himself. He recovered his composure and rode forward, the crowd parting to allow passage. Ghost had dismounted and stood beside the entrance. The passageway was formed in a great tree that was wider than the road itself, its doors a curious dark rock within the living wood, woven into the hinges. The portal itself was massive, and on the stone was carved scenes of elves, men, halflings, and dwarves, all marching off in the distance, descending great stairs into caverns below. Gend came forward and opened them with a strange stone key inserted into the crevice between the great slabs. It slid in with a quiet scraping sound, and, with a few jittery twists, he pulled it forth, and the doors ground slowly outward, bent by the shifting of the great tree. The halfling quickly pocketed his artifact and stepped aside. Gend remained outside, politely guiding people through the hollow alcove, and downward along a steep ramp to a large cavern some distance within. He managed to find torches in a dry corner for everyone to get reasonably comfortable. Ghost had to gruffly acknowledge the halfling had not proven entirely useless. No one bothered to inquire how Gen had acquired the key. As the last refugees made their way slowly through the door, Ghost ushered Joven in ahead of him. Make certain the rabble stay together and send me the halflings so we can seal these damned doors. No need to advertise our presence. The young man made no response, and Ghost considered hauling him back and boxing his ears, but then the knight and his orc blood brother appeared from within the caves. Gen says we have to shove these doors back so we can reseal them. Ghost grunted. It's going to take a lot of muscle to even budge them, let alone get them back where they were. I guess that means I'm the one to do it. Logan chuckled. I do not know who else could do it better. Even you won't be able to move these things. Ghost tapped the massive hunks of rock. They're a foot thick and solid stone, not to mention the heavy wood of this strange tree. I doubt it's going to give simply because we wish to conceal our passing. Well, I'm not just going to sit here and stare at him. And with that, Grimtooth braced himself, grasped the edge of one of the doors, and gave a great heave. It flew inward, and the orc nearly fell on his back. Perplexed, Ghost gave the second door a light tug with one hand. It slid easily shut, as though greased. The Napoleon laughed. Dwarven engineering, I suppose. Logan shook his head as the two closed the doors. The pitter-patter of small feet caused the knight to turn. Gen appeared, looking unusually strained. The knight spoke to him with gentle concern. You all right, friend? You seem a bit distracted. Gen's head snapped up. Oh, no, everything is quite all right. Just a rather hectic day, don't you think? Of course, Logan agreed. All over now, though, if you could seal the doors, that is. Yes, of course. The small figure rushed forward, fumbling in his pack. He pulled out the odd key, shaped like a narrow pyramid, and slid it into the gap between the doors, where, on the interior, the carvings actually depicted a round and rising sun. After a little jerking and twisting, there was a creaking sound, and the walls seemed to shake. A small shaft of light from the narrow gap in the doors went out. Gen grumbled and scrambled a bit more, and then the light of a torch appeared. The others filed in behind him as they turned and made their way to the rest of the group. Are all the refugees together in the cavern, Gen? Asked Logan. We don't want anyone wandering off on their own. What? Oh, yes. They're quite settled. Excellent. I can stand to get some rest. Well, we should be able to. Nothing to bother us in here. Ghost ran his hand along the stone. I still don't feel comfortable without a watch for the night, even under all this thick rock. Gen smiled back at him. Well, naturally, famous soldier that you are, but here we should be just fine. Ghost snarled. Do not try to flatter me, halfling. I wouldn't care if we were under the protection of 100,000 warriors and the gods themselves. I'd still set a watch. Tonight will be no different. Logan's mailed hand came down none too gently on Ghost's shoulder. I don't believe it's your decision to make anymore, Greymane. Ghost flinched at the mention of his former name. Before he could respond, they rounded a corner to see the cavern erupt out of the low-ceilinged stone rampway they had been following deeper under the earth. A few improvised torches lit the darker corners of the expanse, but the high ceiling held a few small patches of glowing moss that gave the room an eerie, soft glow. Despite the strange surroundings, those within had done their best to make do. Straw and wood planks had been laid down as improvised bedding for the night, and most of the people had simply fallen onto them in exhaustion. Logan spotted Neep attending to Diaga in one of the corners. He pointed this out to the others, and they walked over. Caliandra was aiding the Firecat as the two tried to make Diaga comfortable. Neep spun as Logan approached, and only barely relaxed when she recognized him. The knight knelt beside the mage and asked the priestess, How is he? The young woman smiled. Oh, I know very little about his condition, but his friend seems to think he's fine. Logan smiled. Neep would know best. Neep, is that its name? Grimtooth chimed in. Her name, actually, lass. Turns out cats can be gals, too. The Firecat cocked her head as though trying to determine if she should be insulted by the comment. Deciding it was not worth her time, the brightly colored feline nestled up against Diaga to keep him warm, and curled her long tail protectively around Caliandra as well. The gesture drew a smile from the young woman, and Logan spoke up. You are Caliandra, correct? A priestess Vendoth who was a friend of Joseph? Yes. I'm sorry I could not save him. Logan patted her shoulders and stood. I'm sure you did all you could. Please keep an eye on my friend Diaga. We need him. Another smile crossed her face. I know, sir, I will. We need him too. Ghost tapped the knight in the arm. One of the men told me that Trem and Javanaleth have headed that way. He pointed to a tunnel off the main cavern. They took Joseph's body with them. Logan adjusted his armor. We should go then. We all need to talk. As they crossed the stone floor, a shadow detached itself from the wall and joined them. Grimtooth nodded at Wrath as he fell in beside them. The assassin did not respond, and the orc shrugged. Wrath had saved their lives, which for Grimtooth was enough to warrant his respect and silence of the unnerving habits of the cloaked man. Logan glanced back disapprovingly, but he did not suggest the soft-stepping figure leave. Ghost waved again to join them, and the group disappeared into the small passage. A few feet into the tunnel, Logan slowed to allow the others to catch up. He only walked for a few moments before opening out into another smaller cave, where Trem and Joven, stripped to the waist, were busily stacking stones about the dead body of the old man. Trem had placed Joseph's sword hilt up in his dead hands, the blade pointed down to his feet. Joven was heaving a large boulder onto the fourth layer of the cairn. Without asking, Logan and Grimtooth shed their armor and started to help. Ghost casually pulled out his blade and sat sharpening it to one side, while Gend wandered around without purpose, and Wrath leaned silently and unmoving against the gray wall of the cave. The four workers kept at their duty for almost an hour until Trem laid the last stone on top. No one said a word as they stood around the cairn, and Trem simply turned and walked to the wall where he sat down. The others gathered around him on the floor, passing a water skin between them. Wrath stayed somewhat out of the way as the rest avoided breaking the silence. Jovaneleth let Logan check his leg over until Trem finally broke quiet. How long do we have to travel underground? Gend piped up from outside the group. Less than a week or so, if we hurry. Ghost shook his head in doubt. Can't move very fast with all these people, and those wagons barely fit beneath the roof of the downward entrance into the first cavern. How can we know if they'll make it the whole way through? Gend jumped in again. I think it's wide enough, if I remember right. Grimtooth nodded. I have to leave him behind. Can I take a chance of being slow and running out of food? But we best bring the horses. Logan stood and gathered himself, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room before saying, This is all well and good to think about our immediate future, but there are other issues we need to discuss. Now, Grimtooth and I joined this quest with the intent of fulfilling our duty to protect and serve the innocent people of Legotia, which we have done. Still, the motivations of everyone in this room must be made known, and before all present. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas. Why are we here? There was a long moment of silence that Ghost would not allow to stand for long. Slaying his blade on the stone, he rubbed his hands together. I assume, Knight, that you are addressing me in particular. My intentions have seemed deceitful even when I claim to tell you truly what I seek, but I have had reason to be untruthful. My purpose is as simple as it is unforgiving. Ghost closed his eyes momentarily, then continued in a steady voice. The young mage caught on to my identity first, being a Napoleon himself. I am indeed the infamous Greymane Squall who betrayed his people to try to save his family and himself. As you can see, my plan did not work to my benefit. I had to stand in the presence of this wolfbane and watch members of my family murdered before my very eyes. I was told that no turncoat could be trusted with their freedom and thrown in prison, where I heard the last gasps of my remaining family members curse my name. I intend to repay Wolfbane with every hurt he has brought upon my kin and me. I'm continuing south to find this mysterious city I spoke of, Yulinar, where supposedly they can direct me to an ancient weapon of the gods that would give me the power to carry out my vengeance. Gend spoke up. Yulinar, that's the great city of the Malarians. Ghost shot him a baleful look. Malarians. Why did you not mention you knew of them before? The halfling looked as though he desperately wanted to take back what he said, but he averted his eyes and muttered, It must have slipped my mind. Even if you find this weapon, Joven interrupted, what makes you think the gods, or whatever they have set to guard it, would let you take it? Ghost glared at the young warrior. If they won't give it to me, I will take it. What's your plan, boy? Still intend to hunt down your father? Joven met his gaze. Yes, and I'll still help you if you help me. Then you had better hope we get what I want. Logan interjected. All well and good, Ghost, but I don't believe Grimtooth and I can in good conscience assist a man who would leave innocent people behind to die at the hands of murderous bandits. I did what I thought was best. Your sympathies for these people are understandable, but they represent a small portion of the suffering occurring in Legotia. Worse, they are only slowing us down, and it will get harder as the days go by. Where exactly do you intend to take them? How will you feed so many? Did you even consider these things, Knight? Logan scratched his chin in frustration. It's not for me to determine what to do after saving them. We could not leave them behind when they were asking for our aid. Aye, Grimtooth added. We help people, always. Then can I assume you two will be leading these people to safety once we're clear of the caverns? We, Logan answered steadily, shall do our best to ensure their safety. If we can stay with you and the others, we will. Your quest, misguided though it might be, has great implications for Legotia and our homeland. We will not sit idly by. Ghost seemed to accept this and turned to Trem. What about you, half-elf? We've all heard your strange, unbelievable things about you, and we have all seen what you can do with that magical sword of yours. What will you do? Trem looked away from the pile of stones before him and spoke softly as though to no one. I will not discuss my origins or past with anyone here. Those who need to know have already been told. I'm no longer bound to Jovaneleth since I broke that oath when I deserted him at Delmore. So I will make my own way and do it as I see fit. Not to argue with you, Trem, Logan remarked, but you are one of us. You helped us save Ghost back at Gyla Kill, and you rescued Joven from the invaders at Delmore, even if you abandoned him at first. Your actions say you're bound to us whether you admit it or not. And even if those instances were not enough, you've nowhere else to turn to. If you had truly wanted to go, you should have done so before we came to the caverns. Perhaps you're right. I went back to make amends for my abandonment of Joven, and I have fulfilled that duty. I want no part of weapons or gods. Gend interjected quickly. Nor do I. My adventures are the stuff of legend, of course, but this all seems a bit much. Whether you like it or not, you are with us for a while longer, Trem. I'll not let you go back to the entrance we used. Opening it could alert any enemies who manage to follow us here, and maybe watching our return. And if you're coming through the tunnels, Ghost added, you may as well consider remaining with us all a while longer once we get clear of them. Trem stood up and hurled a rock at the wall in rage. What have I possibly done to make any of you want me around? Do you not see what has happened to those who put faith in me? He gestured furiously to the freshly made cairn. Twice I failed Joseph, and the second time it killed him. I'm more of a danger to you than an asset. Trem, Joven said softly, you're basing that belief on your past. Show them the blade. Tell them the truth. There was a moment of silence as the two locked eyes. Trem's face went from a mask of anger and betrayal to gradual resignation as he gave in. Grimtooth and Logan exchanged a look. What is he talking about, Trem? What about your sword? It's not his sword, Joven said, stepping towards Trem. Show them. Trem held the younger man's gaze for a moment and then withdrew his sword from its sheath and held it out, hand shaking. Logan and Ghost stepped forward to examine it, and even Wrath seemed to perk up from his perch of disinterest. The blade shone forth clearly, and interwoven in its steel were pulsing runes of an ancient language. One Diaga would have recognized as that of the gods themselves, had he been there. Logan's eyes widened in shock as he whispered, I know those symbols. I've seen them in sketches and diagrams. This is the blade of Vakhtun el-Vak. I should have recognized it before. The sword that killed Bull the Warrior, and then was used against Vakhtun himself. That shading Gylo kill, Ghost breathed. It said the name El-Vak. I couldn't figure out why until now. Ah, Grimtooth cried. Then that'd mean... Trem cut him off. Yes, I took this blade from the battlefield. I was there when Bull the Warrior died. Joseph did know me before. I tried to aid him many years ago and failed. I've lived a great deal longer than any of you would believe. An existence that was not of my choosing, and has proven more punishment than blessing. I look as I do because I was cursed by the god of time, Kurvin. He froze me at my Nivalan. In my dreams, I've spoken with him, and he tells me that a great horror is bearing down on our world, and, somehow, with a piece of him inside me, I'm to play a great part in what's to come. Except I wanted nothing to do with it, any of it, and still don't. Kurvin made my true mother give me away to another family when I was born, and all I've ever wanted was to find her, to learn why she abandoned me, and to become a name remembered in the grand stories of Tethnir as a hero like Kuldrin Baron or Cran Broadex, Tovas Uratha, or any number of other legends I read about as a child. And instead I've been shown the harsh truth of the world as it grows darker and bleaker each passing day. There was a silence following Trem's declaration as Logan lifted the blade and examined it further. Joven broke in, speaking directly to Trem. Perhaps I acted in haste when I told you I could no longer trust you. You came back for me after all. I don't see how any of us could survive alone, even you. And though you say you wish to retreat from this doom you believe is preordained, you're here, now, and I believe some part of you still holds on to that noble scrap of hope. Trem, added the knight, Gavenoleth sees the truth of you better than you see it yourself. You say you want nothing to do with this coming dark time, yet you left your home with Joven. You could have turned back at any moment, but the only time you've changed course was brief, and then you went back to Delmore. Who are you really lying to, if not yourself? Trem looked around at each of them. Even you, he asked Ghost. You'd have me stay. The Napoleon snorted. I don't believe in any coming calamity or dire threat, and the gods have no hold on me. You have a gift for violence and a powerful weapon at your disposal. I suggest you shed this belief of your futility and seize the chance to change your future. You think you've lost much, half-elf? But until you truly lose everything, you'll be amazed how deep the suffering can take you. Maybe once you really reach the bottom, you'll stop lamenting your lot in life and embrace the opportunities given to you. But it is a choice, whispered Wrath. The half-elf must make it, alone. Each of you gives him your reasons for staying on the course that is similar to your own. He must decide what to do with his gift. Trem sighed. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but you're correct, Logan. I've not turned back yet, and certainly cannot do so now. We remain together for the foreseeable future. Good, Logan said with finality. So what do we do in the meantime? We need to set our priorities, Ghost said. You brought a small village into the caves with us. Before we take them any further, there needs to be a decision made about how much is owed to them. He held up his hands to stave off the onslaught of criticism. I know you all believe I do not care about these people. That's not true. I simply care more about my own quest. They're with us now. We have to figure out what to do with them once we get clear of the caves. I think it'd be obvious. Grimtooth crossed his great arms as though daring Ghost to argue. We find him a new home. Easier said than done, Orc. Ghost is right, Logan admitted. Few of us know what is at the other end of this tunnel, and the time it will take to find Yulinar will likely exceed our supply limit. We have to determine what to do, where to lead these refugees, before we get above ground. There should still be dwarves here, Gend piped up. They used to be the caretakers of the road, and if they moved on, there are the unclaimed lands to the west, near the town of Glimmerhold. That region is not unlike the fields found near Delmore. Ghost shook his head. I cannot and will not waste time marching these people to safety. It could take months. Then I guess that's where we part ways, Joven said matter-of-factly. Some will go to Yulinar, and others to Glimmerhold. There's something else. Trem retrieved his sword from Logan. As I see it, if that army in Gylo Kill has already moved this far south, then much of Lagosha is in danger. Amadeus is pinned within their own homeland. We saw how meager the defenses of Gylo Kill and the Dust Plains are. This Nerathian-backed army could consume all of Lagosha by the time we bring the people of Delmore to safety, or recover the information on the weapons Ghost wants. What are you saying, Joven asked? That we might already be too late in either case. I don't think this invasion will end with the Dust Plains, or even Lagosha, for that matter. First, the army will incinerate the lands east of the Dragon Scales with Broken, and then Aves, and your homeland will be next. Joven grew pale at the thought. But we can't go back, not now. Ghost raised his voice in defiance of the idea. We go forward and bring back what we need to fight the invaders. Don't be deceived by my urgency to go south to Vanileth. I intend to return and fight. You're going to need a lot more men, Trem said. Ghost rounded on him. And where would you suggest I find them, half-elf? I can't even get this soft-hearted troop to recognize the necessity of my actions. We need to enlist the help of the Eagle Knights. They're the only military organization strong enough to aid us. Aye, Grimtooth said, but Tremnia forgot. They won't be likely to help strangers at all. True, half-elf, Ghost added. I doubt they will believe your story of the sword either. They'd be more likely to accuse you of theft than help you. I can gain their trust. The others turned to Joven. The young man cleared his throat before saying, My mother, she traveled to the fortress of Aves as an ambassador for my father. Bladehelm and my father represent people who were once part of the Eagle Knights, and recently there's been a talk of patching up old differences. My mother was still in Aves when I left. There's no reason to think she would leave until her work was done. And she could get them to listen to us, Logan asked. Trem cut Joven off, saying, We have to try. Reaching Bladehelm would take too long, and we'd leave the Eagle Knights in the wake of the broken army. Besides, there are other allies near them we can call upon. Joven was puzzled. Who could that be if not my people? Trem took a deep breath. The Silverleaf Foresters. Ghost laughed. Come on, half-elf. Even you can't be that foolish. Those elves despise the Eagle Knights. They fought 3 bloody and hate-filled wars with them. Why would the elves of Silverleaf come to the aid of their greatest foes? He's right, Trem, Logan added. The two hate each other. You must know that. You're correct that the Eagle Knights despise all things elven, but I was once a servant to Aves, and I have elven blood. Garand Oakheart and Cauldron Baron united the two groups to oppose the god Sorcerer during the Arcane Wars. Why, Joven's own mother is elven, and she's there negotiating with them. Clearly there are precedents for such cooperation. Cauldron Baron also lost his position as commander of Aves because he sided with Garand Oakheart, Ghost reminded Trem. Even in the darkest of times, the Knights and Foresters have been unable to put aside their differences. You're suddenly talking as though you need to take part in all this, Trem, Logan said, ignoring Ghost. Do you really think we can broker some kind of truce? Those in Aves will have their backs against the wall. The Foresters will try to hide in Silverleaf, but Narath and his army have shown a willingness to slaughter and burn anything necessary to call mortal people. Only together do they stand a chance. We have to convince them both their doom is at hand, which it assuredly is if they don't do something about it. It's a risky gamble, Trem, Joven warned. You're asking them to forget years of feuding and band together, something they've never considered, not even during the invasion of the army of the Lion. We just have to convince them that the danger is greater this time, Trem murmured. We, Ghost chuckled. You say you're unsure what you'll do once we're free of the caverns, but as the knight pointed out, you talk as if you're one of us. Whether I remain with you or not, I'm simply assessing the realities of the present. You want a weapon to fight back against the people who took your home and family from you. Logan wants to ensure the safety of the people of Delmore. I am simply pointing out that neither is really possible until you solve the greater challenge of halting the invasion of Lagosha. Trem closed his eyes and leaned against the wall of the cave. But that is really a moot point. We have to get out of here first. Yes, Logan agreed. And what of the refugees? We must guide them through the caverns. Perhaps we can find the city Yulinar. We can use that as a safe haven for them temporarily. But we need to find out where it is, and if it's even possible to reach. Gen knows, Joven said, the realization suddenly coming to him. Didn't you say you'd heard of that place? What? The halfling seemed caught off guard by being addressed directly. Oh, well, yes, but it's not necessarily as easy as knowing where it is. Be careful, halfling, said Ghost growled. Why is it not easy? Well, Gen brushed his gaudy clothes nervously. There's the issue of the land itself. You see, Southron is mostly desert and rock, and Yulinar is supposed to rest in the middle of one of the greatest expanses of desert they call the Endless Sands. It's very difficult to locate, even if you know where you're going. No roads or signs to speak of that would guide you on your way. But you can find it, Joven said in a way that sounded more like a question than a statement. Yes, Gen said confidently before adding, it just might take a while. So, Logan interjected, trying to keep the group focused on the moment, we haul the wagons and supplies to this underground road. We get clear of the caves, we try to find the city and a place for these people to start over. Then somehow find news of a weapon, find a way to get the people to these unclaimed lands, and reach Aves and Silverleaf in time to broker a truce between two factions who have one of the bloodiest and longest-standing feuds in the history of Testanir. Joven shook his head and laughed mirthlessly. Doesn't seem possible. Well, I am damned well going to try, Ghost said defiantly. Wait. Logan looked over at the still shifting and nervous Solraster Gend. I know you said you've been south before, but didn't you also meet Rath there? Logan turned to the black-robed form. Do you know this city, Yulinar? Rath stared him down. I know of it. Trem met the eyes of the dark figure. Can you take us there? The assassin held his look a moment. I can. Ah, that do be making things a bit easier, maybe. And, Ghost said, if we push these refugees hard and long enough, we can give ourselves more time to reach Silverleaf and Aves, regardless of what any of us decide to do. I know you all have reasons to distrust me, But if Wrath can take us to Ulinar, why not remain together until then? It would be get your precious survivors to a place where they'll be safe, at least for a time. Yes, Logan said, rubbing his chin. It seems to be the simplest solution. And by staying together, we'll have an easier time protecting the people. Ugh, it's going to be an unpleasant walk. Trem cocked his head at the orc. Do you have a better idea? Grimtooth grinned broadly. Can say I do. It's settled then, Logan concluded with authority. Now we should all get some rest. You go on ahead, Trem waved him away. I want a moment alone with Joseph. The others nodded and filed solemnly out of the small cave. Durendaleth left last, pausing as though he wanted to say something to Trem, but then continued on. Trem took in the sounds of the cavern and cast his mind back to the words they had exchanged before when the others were still there. Desperately, he wished Joseph would speak to him, both to advise and to forgive once again. But of course, he did not hear his voice, for the old man was dead and gone. The half-elf stood there in the flickering light from the torch Logan had left him. He did not leave, nor did his eyes waver from their vigil, until at last it burned itself out some hours later. Alright, so that is chapter 26, and I ended up going way longer than I intended to, but I'm glad that I got that done. That's good. So I will put this up on YouTube as soon as possible. As always, you can follow me with @Legacy Chronicle on Twitter, and there's also the Facebook page, which is the Legacy Chronicle. And again, I'm hoping to get another 2 chapters recorded tomorrow. So thank you for stopping by if you did, or catching up with the video on demand, and I'll be back shortly.